Ibn Rushd was a Muslim polymath who mastered a number of different fields. He wrote over 100 books on such varied topics as theology, physics, metaphysics, linguistics, medicine, astronomy, and law, just to mention a few. He was born in Cordoba in modern Spain in the year 1126, and his full name was Abu al-Walid Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Rushd. He became a qadi, a judge, and was eventually appointed the chief judge in Cordoba. And this is important to keep in mind, as many later commentators in Europe have argued that Ibn Rushd's commitment to Islam as a religion must have been only on a kind of surface level, and that he didn't really believe in it, so to say. But when we study his life, we can see that he was deeply committed to the religion of Islam, its laws, and its practices. He also, in some of his writings, seemed to deny bodily resurrection, just like many of the other philosophers seems to have done. But in some places, he even seems to deny any form of afterlife for the human being at all, which would seem rather strange. In his philosophical thought, he was particularly a strong follower of Aristotle and wanted to revive what he thought was a true Aristotelian philosophy. He wrote, quote, "I believe that this man, Aristotle, was a model in nature and the exemplar which nature found for showing final human perfection." The second important thing and aspect of Ibn Rushd's ideas and thought is the relationship between philosophy and religion. To him, that is Ibn Rushd, the only way to know truth definitively is through demonstrative proof. He believed that the truth that can be reached through reason and demonstration is essentially the same exact truth that is expressed in Revelation, in the Quran. In other words, if we find anything in, say, the Quran that goes against what we know about the world through demonstration, either philosophical or, to extend the idea, scientific, those verses have to be understood allegorically or metaphorically. Now, this may be seen as radical by some people, but it fits perfectly well into his larger philosophical thought. And this also allows him to defend the philosophers further from attacks by Al-Ghazali. Not only did Ibn Rushd consider philosophy to be permitted, that is halal in Arabic, he even considered it, based on Quranic verses, to be obligatory for everyone who had the ability to study it. He believed that the Quran asks its readers to investigate and ask questions about creation. Ibn Rushd believes that the truths that we can derive from reasoning or through scientific demonstration is essentially the same truth that is expressed in religion. He has sometimes been attributed with the idea of a double truth, that is, that there's one truth for religion and another truth for philosophy and science, but this is not actually accurate. He believed that the truth that can be reached through reason and demonstration is essentially the same exact truth that is expressed in Revelation, in the Quran. And again, like the other philosophers, he argues that these two only use different languages to express the same thing. The philosophical language is meant for the philosophers who can grasp these abstract concepts, whereas the language of Revelation and the Quran is a rhetorical one of symbols and metaphors that expresses the same truths, but to the wider masses. Now, this isn't all that original, as many other philosophers have expressed basically identical ideas, but Ibn Rushd is especially radical in his rationalism, and in fact, to him, rational and demonstrated proofs always take precedence over religious expression. Now, this may be seen as radical by some people, but it fits perfectly well into his larger philosophical thought, and this also allows him to defend the philosophers further from attacks by Al-Ghazali. Ibn Rushd's rationalistic approach allows him to acquit the philosophers of these charges. He also very famously talked about the role of women in society and wrote a commentary on Plato's very famous The Republic. In this commentary on Plato, he very famously expresses his disdain for the role of women in society, complaining about their being confined to the home and arguing that women should play a much more prominent role in society at the time. He argues that women are actually equal in quality to men in many respects. They are just as capable of performing tasks and professions, and he argues that women should get out and participate more in society by working or engaging themselves in social life. In fact, this would only benefit society and particularly the economics of the state, as there are more women than men, as he clearly stated. But these ideas of Ibn Rushd can certainly be seen as rather modern and progressive for his time. But to him, this was completely in line with his understanding of Islam and its religious law, based on his position also as a judge and jurist of Maliki Islamic law. But there was a period in 1195 when his luck suddenly turned. He was tried in Cordoba, and his teachings were condemned suddenly by the caliph. He was forced to flee the country, go to North Africa, and some of his books were even burned. Many people have speculated about the reason for this very sudden change in attitude towards Ibn Rushd, but most scholars argue that the reasons were most likely political, as they almost always are. Fortunately, though, this condemnation was only temporary, and only a year or two later Ibn Rushd returned to the court in Marrakesh. He was sort of forgiven by the caliph and continued to be friends with the sitting Almohad caliph for the rest of his life. He was, of course, greatly respected and admired during his lifetime, but after he died, his writings had no lasting or, to any large degree, any impact on the Islamic philosophical tradition. It is only in the last century or so that his ideas have been revived in the Islamic world as a kind of champion of rationality and a sort of rational approach to Islam. Instead, it is actually in Europe that Ibn Rushd has been the most influential, and not just a little bit. He was one of the most significant sources for many of the medieval Christian and Jewish writers on philosophy in general. In a way, it can be argued that it is Ibn Rushd who hands over the philosophical intellectual tradition, which had flourished in the Islamic world in the preceding centuries, to the European Christians and Jews. The Christian scholastic traditions owe a whole lot to this man. Thomas Aquinas, Maimonides, Albert the Great, Meister Eckhart, they all read Ibn Rushd. So Ibn Rushd was an incredibly important thinker. He's one of the most significant philosophers in the Islamic world, and one who has had a massive impact on European scholasticism, and thus also, as I said, generally on the intellectual tradition of the world and of Europe generally.